I think it's about time we had to talk about Koei Tecmo, because I think that they've inadvertently put themselves in a very critical position. Nowadays, I'm very hard-pressed to say that Koei Tecmo is a good game publisher. Not to say that they're a bad or a malicious game publisher, but it's getting to the point where their misguided business decisions are affecting the quality of their games. Now, some of you may not know this, but Dynasty Warriors 9 is the third instance in which Koei Tecmo butchered the Musou franchise in order to chase a trend. Last time was when Samurai Warriors 3 was a Wii exclusive, while previous installments of Samurai Warriors were popular on the Sony consoles. And the first time was with Dynasty Warriors 6, where they thought the Rimbu system was going to be a mainstay for the entire generation. And we all know how that quickly fell through. They've done this to their fans 3 times, and I understand that games publishers have to take some risks in order to secure future profits. But when you try to twist and mold your franchise into something that it's not, you end up with a very lackluster product and your customers getting burned out. Like, how can you reassure your fans that you will stay true to the franchise that they love when it's been proven time and time again that you would rather chase a trend rather than produce a quality product that everyone would enjoy? How can any customer trust you when your primary business model hasn't evolved with your core franchise? If none of you know how the Extreme Legends expansions came to be, it all started way back when they released Dynasty Warriors 3, and players were kind of disappointed that they weren't able to play as Lu Bu or Diao Chan, and then a few months later, Omega Force released Dynasty Warriors 3 Extreme Legends, which allowed you to play as Lu Bu, Diao Chan, and Dong Zhuo, and from that point onwards, there would always be a release of a Dynasty Warriors base game, and then a few months along the line, an Extreme Legends expansion that had new characters and extra content. Now back then, DLC wasn't a thing that was as readily available on consoles as it is today, so it was kind of a byproduct of the time. Sure, it meant that you had to buy 2 fully priced games to have a complete product, but the internet wasn't much of a big thing as it was on 6th gen consoles. But that begs the question, why are they sectioning off this extra content on a separate disc that you have to buy on full price, rather than just delaying the game for a bit longer and having all these new characters and features as a complete package? Because they're essentially just hacking off parts of the game and just selling it back to us later as a full price title. I would understand if the base game was in the Extreme Legends expansion, but it's not. They always sell the Extreme Legends expanded content as separate content. If you want the base content inside the Extreme Legends expansion, you have to still have the base game. And you need to transfer the data from the base game onto the expansion, and then you're done, right? No, because the expansion does not have the memory to save all that base data. So if you want to experience the base game and the expanded content at the exact same time, you would have to load the base game data into the expansion every time you load up the game. The experience you had will save, but the data that you transferred will not. This went on for 5 generations of installments. Even on Dynasty Warriors 7, which was on 7th generation consoles that could connect to the internet and has had DLC, still required you to have the expanded disc and the base game at full price. It's clear that they just wanted us to buy both games so that they can make an extra profit, and that's not a very customer-friendly practice. It's not until Dynasty Warriors 8 that when the Extreme Legends came out, it had the base game on it. They only recently figured out to do that, and that's not customer-friendly at all. Another thing Koei Tecmo likes to do is fragment its audience with generational exclusive content. You see, Dynasty Warriors 6 and Dynasty Warriors 8 was in between console generations. And while still mainly selling on the newer generation of consoles, they still wanted to satisfy the old generation. So what they did is make content that's exclusive to the game that's on the older generation. So for Dynasty Warriors 6 that was coming out on the PS3, the PS2 version of the game had 6 of its characters get new weapons and their own story mode. Now, if the newer versions had DLC for these characters, that would have been fine. Not great, but it would have been acceptable at the very least, because the older version may have all the characters and more story, but the newer version is shinier and new, and you can still get them on DLC or whatever. But no, there is absolutely no way to play as the 6 characters as they are in the PS2 version of the game, so the PS3 version just lacks content. They pushed sales into the wrong direction. version. You want people to buy the newer version of your game because the next installment of the franchise is going to be on that newer console. And then there was the complete edition of Dynasty Warriors 8, where everything from the base game and the Extreme Legends content was all on one disc. Everything except for the downloadable cosmetics. And you know what? I thought, okay, fair enough. They're not going to force you to buy 2 games for a complete experience this time around. So if they still just want to sell the cosmetics, that's fine. Except there is no cosmetic DLC for the complete edition of Dynasty Warriors 8. You can only get the DLC for those games on the older generation of console. So not only is the complete version of Dynasty Warriors 8 not the complete version, I can't even attempt to make it the complete version. So even if I attempt to give them money, I can't give them money. Now let's take a look at all of their spin-offs, because there's a lot wrong with them as a business model. So what Omega Force basically does with the Empire's spin-offs is take the existing assets in the base game and retool them for a different experience that's more tactical and less story-driven. And a lot of fans like it better that way, and I can see why. But my main issue with these spin-offs is that they're sold at full price. Because they didn't make anything that's new. They took something that already existed and just made it work differently. It's not new. There is objectively less content in the Empire's games. However, there is more in terms of freedom and choice on what you want to do within the games. So I get the idea that it is something different, but it's not something new. Characters still play the same as they did in the base game. You're just presenting it through a different format. Every single one of your spin-offs that isn't created from dirt is not something new. And the best example for what I'm talking about here is the difference between Samurai Warriors 4-2 and Samurai Warriors Spirit of the Sonata. Because both games are spin-offs of Samurai Warriors 4, but they approach it completely differently. So, Samurai Warriors 4-2 is, as the title would suggest, a sequel to Samurai Warriors 4, which is not very accurate. It's more of a retooling of Samurai Warriors 4. It's the exact same game with the exact same characters, except they fix the economy so that you're not a complete billionaire by the end of the 3rd chapter. The upgrade system is a lot more refined than last time, and they've made some significant tweaks to the gameplay. The story mode also had a focus on the newer characters rather than the entirety of a faction. But with all the new that they've added, there really wasn't much to all that they've produced. Only one new character was added, and he doesn't get as much screen time as he should. They recycle a lot of cutscenes from the previous game, and the challenge mode that they added just can't compete with the Chronicle mode that was in the previous game. Because the Chronicle mode in the previous game was so expansive, you were able to explore and get further characterization out of most of the cast, and on top of that, you could play as any generic officer. Not only that, but there were 5 secret officers that you could unlock. This new challenge mode is just the challenge tower from Samurai Warriors 2. Ignoring the fact that this is how Samurai Warriors 4 should have launched in the first place, it's still just reusing assets and, in the long term, giving you less content. And on the other side of the spectrum, there's Spirit of the Sonata. And this game does so much more than Samurai Warriors 4-2 does. It contains a completely new and original story that's based off a TV show, but that's not what's important. It still reuses all of its gameplay and assets, but there's still a whole lot more to do on top of that. It borrows a lot of elements from Samurai Warriors 4, 4-2, and Empires and puts it together in a completely different experience from the previous 3 examples. No content is sectioned off, it doesn't reuse cutscenes, and we get a lot more new characters this time around. Now, I'm far more forgiving of this game's price tag for not only how much different it is from the previous games, but also its timetable from the release of the previous game and the release of this game. However, I'm still hard-pressed to say that it deserves the full price tag because it's still just retooled assets. You didn't make anything new, you just took what already exists and made it different. Ultimately, what I'm trying to get at here is that there's just too much. Koei Tecmo releases too many spin-offs and too many expansions that tries to cater to too many people. If they just delay the game so that everything can be on the finished product and price things appropriately so that more people would be more inclined to buy their games, then there wouldn't be so much clutter in their library. It's already a chore trying to play the complete version of a game. There's way too many expansions, exclusives, spin-offs, and installments to one game. And as a fan, it's really taxing to keep up, especially when you're not putting that much effort into making sure everyone can get it. Speaking of which, it's very clear to a lot of people that Koei Tecmo has gotten very lazy when it comes to the localization of all of their games. With the exception of the core Dynasty Warriors games, Team Ninja titles, and a few games by Koei Tecmo of Europe, they don't dub any of their games into English. And you know what, I'm fine with this if it was a fighting game or an RPG or a tactical game, which really doesn't say much for me because a lot of the fighting games, tactical games, and RPGs that I like are all dubbed in English. But in fast-paced action games, it's kind of a faux pas to put walls of plot-relevant text on the screen while you're trying to engage in the combat. I mean, I get that with an ever-expanding roster, it's gonna be a chore trying to manage all these characters and their lines, but that's not a problem other games with huge rosters are having. And although it's not a deal-breaker, it is certainly annoying that the best way to passively absorb the plot that's unfolding is to know Japanese. And they don't need to be this cheap. I mean, I could go to the most obscure bargain bin title in both Atlus and Square Enix's library, and I can still find games with full English dubs. And Koei Tecmo barely does that with their main franchise. So I can only come to the conclusion that Koei Tecmo of Europe and America are just lazy and don't want to spend the money. It's not even the fact that we need English voice acting to enjoy the game, it's just a sign of proof that Koei Tecmo cares about their Western audience. And that's getting really hard to prove with each new installment of their new games. Because it was a feature that all of their games had, now it's just a handful of them. And guess what? When they partner with big companies like Square Enix and Nintendo, full English voice acting for their games.
For Arbor! To arms!
Mixing it up, eh?
When they partner with companies like Namco Bandai, who was just as money grubbing with their localization as they are, they couldn't give two shits. And let's come back to niche titles and pricing because I want to touch more on that. So let's look at the niche title called Knights of Azure produced by Koei Tecmo. It's a digital exclusive that came out in 2016. To this day, they're still selling it for $60 and it has no demo, which wouldn't be much of a big deal except the year later, they came out with Knights of Azure 2. The first game's price didn't go down to encourage people to buy it, and again, the sequel cost $60 with no demo. Now let's take a look at a recent Dynasty Warriors spin-off, Dynasty Warriors Godseekers. It came out last year, it was barely advertised, still $60, no demo. Let's take a look at the Atelier series. Atelier Sophie came out 2016, barely advertised, $60, no demo. The game's sequel, Atelier Ferris, came out the following year, $60, barely advertised, no demo. The sequel to that game came out this year, $60, no demo. The previous game's prices have not dropped. Blue Reflections came out last year, was sparsely advertised, still $60, no demo. Then there's Tokiden Kiwami, an HD port of a Vita game with its expansions attached. That's still sold as $60. Granted, that one does have a demo. However, when Tokiden 2 came out, the price of Kiwami did not drop, and Tokiden 2 does not have a demo. How are these smaller games supposed to compete compared to your titans? It's really hard for your customers to financially support you when you put this much stock into your smaller titles as much as you would your big main sellers. Because of course those are going to sell well to the point where you're going to lower the price later, but a lot of your niche titles are digital exclusives and they don't have the same name recognition say Dead or Alive or Dynasty Warriors has, and you don't even make demos for these games to see if the customers will think it'll be worth the full price. Do we even have to look at other companies to compare and contrast? You know what, let's do that. Let's take a look at somebody. Let's take a look at your good old buddies Square Enix. So let's start off with something comparable to Dynasty Warriors, their big heavy hitter, which is Final Fantasy. The most recent entry, Final Fantasy 15. Now sadly, Square Enix has stopped selling the regular version, and all they have is the Royal Edition bundle, which comes with the full game, 3 downloadable extra episodes, and a whole bunch of other bonus content and improvements to the game. And you know what? It ain't even $60, which is definitely comparable if they sold enough copies of the game to justify lowering the price tag. But you know what, that's the big boys table. Let's take a look at the smaller titles as comparison. Let's start with something random like I Am Setsuna. Let's see, it came out 2016, there is no demo for it, but hey, it's not $60. In fact, I'd say that's a reasonable price for an online exclusive. Okay, let's try a spin-off. Dragon Quest Builders. Okay, now that's $60. That's a fully priced game. but it has a demo. I'm okay with the game charging as much as they want as long as they release a demo so people can decide for themselves whether or not it's worth the asking price. So that's good. Star Ocean: Integrity and Faithlessness came out 2016 and it's $30. That's definitely reasonable. Nier Automata, it's $60, but you can play the demo. Now let's take a look at Koei Tecmo's collabs with Square Enix. Dragon Quest Heroes: The World Tree's Woe and the Blight Below. That was $60 when it came out, but its price has now recently dropped. And now the new game, Dragon Quest II, is $60, but you can play the demo. Now, Square Enix still has games that are being charged full price, but those are games that came out relatively recent, and based off the track record, it looks like those games will be dropping in price soon. But Koei Tecmo has had games out that's been out for almost 3 or 4 years now, and they have yet to drop the full price. So clearly no one's keeping track of the online market to see if things need to be priced down to drive public interest. They just throw games onto the store and just let them sit there like they're old YouTube videos, and in times when money and people's free time are more valuable to them than ever, they still choose to sell them at full price like this. Or at least it's like this in North America. I don't know the market of Europe or Japan that well, but this is a big issue against them nonetheless. Now, on PC, the pricing is a lot more forgiving, with Knights of Azure and Atelier Sophie being priced down, but still, all the other games are $60. Now, some of you might be thinking that it's unfair for me to compare Koei Tecmo to a titan like Square Enix, and to that I say they should stop trying to copy Square Enix. This is an example of a competent company versus, well, Koei Tecmo.
I took an arrow in the knee.
Not saying that Square Enix is the pinnacle of virtue, they have their own problems that need addressing, but they are fully aware of what their customers like and expect from them, mostly. Koei Tecmo, on the other hand, is so quick to chase a trend that they'll forsake their own audience to do so. And sadly, this is a thing that I always wanted to talk about, but never really found the opportunity to say anything about it. Koei Tecmo is the first example of a Japanese company not selling their customers a product because of the discourse of the Western market. Some of you may remember a few years back, Koei Tecmo didn't want to sell Dead or Alive Extreme 3 in the West because of the heated discussions around gender representation in video games. Now, whether you agree or disagree with those sentiments is completely up to you. It doesn't really matter to this argument because the game itself was fully localized.
So this game never came out in America, huh?
No, and it never will.
Whoa.
And it has English subtitles.
Fucking
So
awesome.
the whole game's in English.
And they decided not to sell it in the West. That's just money down the drain. They shot themselves in the foot with that decision to do that. And now they've made it pretty clear that they can be influenced in this way. And guess what? It worked. Now there isn't going to be any fan service in Dead or Alive 6. So they're forsaking their fans that like that aspect about their games because of social pressure. Keep in mind, they've always marketed Dead or Alive like this. Okay, quick edit. I could not for the life of me find the ad. It must have gotten purged from the internet somehow. But basically the ad was a Japanese commercial about these guys using the 6-axis to play around with the jiggle physics. I could have replaced it with an American ad, because those are pretty dodgy as well, but that ad really represent what I was trying to get at, because you had to look at these guys' faces. And I don't know where that video is, and I looked everywhere for it. Even the usual suspects who are complaining about this type of stuff don't have it running in their B-roll. If you know where the video is, please comment down below. But anyway, back to the video. Regardless of your personal taste on this subject matter, you can't deny that there is a sizable market for this. And some offhand research might imply that there's a sizable female fanbase, and they're just gonna ignore that market because they don't want to get lambasted by Western articles. Some say Team Ninja is the last bastion of hope within Koei Tecmo. I say they're already compromised. Or do you not remember Razor's Edge, the best Ninja Gaiden game?
Kana's father. Isn't that right, Kana?
Or how about the spin-off Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z, a game about killing zombies long after that trend died out? Or how about Nioh, a Souls-like? And if Razor's Edge and DOA 6 are any indication, I dread the day that Ninja Gaiden 4 comes out. Cause I guarantee you it's going to be more in line with what's popular right now than with the elements that make Ninja Gaiden, with gratuitous gore and sexual themes and all. Which brings me back to my original point. Koei Tecmo is putting themselves in a bad spot. They make very strange business decisions based off of what's popular and not what's good for their games. Their ability to cater to the Western market is diminishing over time. They're slow to change, they don't know how to sell their products correctly, which makes them primed to be easily manipulated by public outrage. And I said that this started with Dynasty Warriors 9, but really this has been an ongoing problem. And it's only a matter of when, not if, they do it again. I mean, was going open world the logical next step for the Dynasty Warriors series? Or were they just me tooing off of the hype of other open world games that were being announced at the time? Were people clamoring for Ninja Gaiden's combat to be toned down and simplified? Or was this a byproduct of the game requiring balance so that the devs could shoehorn in multiplayer during a time when shoehorned in multiplayer was being heavily criticized? Did they think that the Wii was the best platform for Samurai Warriors 3? Or was it because they cut a deal with Nintendo because the Wii sold ludicrously well, thinking that those higher numbers would translate to higher sales for their game? Did they overly simplify the combat in Dynasty Warriors 6 because they thought the fans would like it? Or is it because they wanted simplicity between the gameplay and motion capture so they don't have to work as hard? Were people really that bothered by the fan service in DOA to the point where you had to remove it in the next installment? Or are they just taking preemptive steps to not receive backlash? Because I don't know about you guys, but the last two installments of DOA heavily depended on its fan service. And they replaced the fan service with battle damage and slow-mo. Well, look at here, they're copying companies that are comparable to them. All I want Koei Tecmo to do is take a long look at themselves as a company and look at their products and look at their customer feedback. And I want them to ask themselves why Dynasty Warriors was so successful in the first place. Why was Ninja Gaiden so popular in the first place? Why do their customers gravitate towards DOA when they're looking for fighting games? Stop trying to copy other companies and find out what makes your products so unique. And I know what we can do to help Koei Tecmo understand this as consumers. We should all subscribe to these wonderful creators on YouTube. Sexy Gravy is a YouTuber who also screamed into the microphone for an extended period of time about Dynasty Warriors 9, and has a lot of relevant content that's really interesting to watch. And then there's Kaiser Trigger, who's just as much as weeb trash as I am, and he has a lot of opinions about anime. So check his videos out, they're really interesting and funny. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the current state of Koei Tecmo. I don't hate the company. I'm not calling for any type of boycott or anything like that. I'm just saying we should be a bit more vigilant about the company's direction. Because like I said, it's not a matter of if they do something stupid in the future, because they've already done it. So thank you, Koei Tecmo. You're the only Japanese company that I've ever known that went out of their way to make boobies less fun.